Hello and welcome to this third video of our series of conversations on youth participation, a series of discussions on youth political engagement, youth activism, and youth rights in times of crisis. Today, we are happy to be talking with Lucija Karnelutti from the Organizing Bureau of European School Student Unions. Lucija, hello, and thank you for being with us today.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So Lucija, you are a member of the board of the Organizing Bureau of European School Student Unions, OBESSU, which is a platform for cooperation between national school student unions that are active in general secondary and secondary vocational education in Europe. And as part of your portfolio, you have important topics including the environment, education funding, or membership development. You are Slovenian and your home organization is the Students' Organization of Slovenia. And you are also a student yourself, enrolled in the University of Ljubljana. Thank you for being with us, despite what I imagine is a very busy schedule. And taking part in this discussion as well, we have two colleagues, respectively, from the European Free Alliance, IFA, and the European Free Alliance Youth, Dejan and Adrian. Hello.
Hello, good morning. Hi.
Dejan, you are a political advisor for IFA, prior to which you worked in the European Parliament, and you are an activist yourself, involved in the Welsh independence movement. And as such, you were involved in the youth branch of IFA in the past. Adrian, you are the coordinator of the youth branch of IFA. You are Basque and you have been involved in politics and youth movements for a long time, campaigning for peaceful and democratic self-determination for the Basque country and beyond. Thank you for your time and for being with us today as well. So, Lucija, your portfolio as a member of OBESSU's board includes several crucial topics for education, such as the environment and funding. And you are also following the organization's Seeds for Integration project, which aims at building an inclusive secondary education environment through seed funding allocated to secondary school student unions across Europe. In the current context, how are you and your colleagues managing to maintain your activity? And how do you feel student unions are coping with the public health crisis? So are they still as engaged as before, despite the restrictions that are in place? Or do you feel like the disruption that occurred in education across Europe weakened student unions in any way?
Yeah, thank you again for your having me here. And also this conversation probably wouldn't be possible if you weren't in the middle of the crisis. And thank you for your lovely introduction. So of course, the current situation came to us unexpectedly and of course has changed the way we work quite drastically. Even though the board of OBESSU works remotely at all times, so our organization and secretariat are based in Brussels, while we, the board members, work from home. I feel like we all needed quite some time to adapt to these new working conditions and restrictions, especially because our day-to-day work, of course, includes meeting people, talking to them face-to-face, interacting, traveling, so all the things that, of course, are currently not possible for us to do. So I feel like we, of course, needed some time to do this really switch to working strictly from our homes, also working for our organization, for our work, while also studying from home, which has been a challenge, but I feel like we have now figured it out, so I feel like we've done it good, hopefully. So as for OBESSU, the majority of our events and projects planned for this year unfortunately had to be put to a hold, or of course be amended and changed, which for us as an organization is of course hard and sad had to do, given that these are the projects that were foreseen years ahead. Our membership, which covers the entire Europe, of course, is looking forward to it, and also after all, our political work also depends on it. So it was definitely a challenge how we'll manage to do everything, especially now in this time that are filled with uncertainty, whether the second wave will come or not, whether we'll manage to do these events in the spring and winter time, or this will be the new reality until the next year. So I feel like for now, we figured it out, but we really, fingers crossed, hope that everything will go back to normal as soon as possible and we can continue with our work. Of course, the current situation in advocacy level or like in this educational field brought up a lot of new questions, problems, and of course areas for us to work and fight at. The coronavirus was at first seen as this big health crisis, which later on was clear that it will of course bring or turn out to become a crisis that will tackle almost every aspect of our lives. And for school students and of course youth, overall it of course turned out to be a really big educational while also social crisis. So this is also like two of the main fields of crisis we were working on during these past 3-4 months. And of course the majority of our work now shifted online to these Zoom platforms and different platforms. We've done a lot of webinars, either the ones that we wanted to do in person but were then moved onto the internet, or even webinars that were helping our member organizations to equip them with new knowledge as to how to work in these uncertain times, how to work, how to still be a youth activist, but just online, and how to use the platforms and support them in any kind of way. As for our membership and as for school student unions overall, I feel like the current crisis hit them quite similarly than it did OBESSU. So of course, these face-to-face events and meetings had to be cancelled. But I do feel like this crisis has brought us together in a way that we are now fighting this common fight, common goal. That because over the night, literally, all of us students were sent home from schools, from our university cities, and had to get ready for this distance learning. And I feel like this has all put us into this before the same problem, that we were uncertain as how our education will continue. So we knew that it will continue from the comfort of our homes, but we didn't know what this will mean for our final exams, for our grades, for our presentations. Basically, there were no clear guidelines and there are no clear timeline as to when we'll go back to school and how our education will go. So I feel like from this perspective, a lot of our school student unions actually started working on advocacy, started working with governments, because we are in, of course, the democratic representation of the majority of school students in Europe, and we're started with to the governments with different recommendations and guidelines as to how we would like to see education going, and also had to kind of inform them of the problems that the current educational system was bringing during this time of coronavirus. So after all, of course, the current situation changed the way we work, but I would definitely not say that it weakened our unions. I feel like it definitely even brought us together, because we had this common fight to fight, and I feel like it will definitely be start of something new, because of course now we're used to having meetings in a different way, so I think it will change also the future of this activism work.
Thank you. Hearing what you were just saying, I realized that you have been facing a lot of the things that we are also facing at the Coppieters Foundation, with a lot of our projects, especially conferences, being postponed or cancelled or moved online, which is also an opportunity to explore new ways of working, putting in place online discussions such as this one. And I thought it was interesting that you raised the fact that, on the contrary, it didn't weaken the student unions that you work with, but it was a way for you all to come together and also perhaps explore other dimensions and other topics, because this crisis is so multi-dimensional that it forces us to think more globally about the context. Thank you. I'll now give the floor to Diane for the second question.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you, Lucia, for agreeing to take part. So at the end of March this year, UNESCO released a report that estimated around 87% of registered students across the whole world were affected by the school closures due to the outbreak of COVID-19, which is an unprecedented educational disruption. And this disruption has affected some students more than others, of course. For instance, those who don't have the technological equipment or the internet connectivity necessary to be able to follow courses and so on. So which other inequalities in accessing education have been exacerbated by the current crisis? And how are these inequalities being addressed by student unions and by OBESSU?
So as I also said before, this current situation is in fact for school students and for the youth an educational crisis that has actually shown a lot of inequalities that still do exist in our educational systems, but also the inequalities that we may be not even aware of that exist, but of course they do. So at OBESSU, we believe that equity should of course be government's main concern, as these measures affect disproportionately disadvantaged learners. And not only that this way their learning path is interrupted, but also it has a really big psychological impact also on the teachers, students, and also especially apprentices and also their families. Also because we have to take into consideration here these limitations of mental health services that are offered online and also that derive from the social distancing measures. So of course, as I said before, that when we take a line at the end of this crisis, it really is a crisis that has shown us the areas we especially have to tackle to really have this system better. So I think one of the things you already mentioned is this social economic background, so that not all students have this access to technological equipment, which I think was something that the majority also of the governments were kind of forgetting about, and also schools, because it now seems quite logical that everyone would have access to, but when you hear stories actually from the school students and the families that how they were doing this educational system during this time, it is heartbreaking, and it is definitely that governments should definitely put in place some welfare programs and also offer the equal and inclusive education for everyone. With also regarding social economic background students, also it was a really big problem because they were losing welfare services such as of course meals and accommodation, and also there was this problem of students not being able to do their student work, which for the majority of students and for quite a big chunk of them is the only way of literally surviving month to month. So I think this is kind of the part where the crisis hits the most, and I feel like some governments, and also with the help of course of student and school student unions, I can also say from personal experience in my own country, that these were the topics that we were fighting for. We managed to get, of course, there are also from different school student unions, there were different programs that were collecting, either used old computers to be able to give to students to be able to work during this time, and also different welfare programs were building up during this time. So it was really nice to see. But I feel like also this is a lesson for the future of our education, that even if this crisis comes again, or any kind of crisis, that these are the problems that should be tackled long time ago, not to be shown in this time of crisis. So other inequalities or other school students that were also hurt during this crisis is of course also school students with disabilities, either that are unable to move, so these physical disabilities, and of course also students with weakened hearing or eyesight or anything, because these students are their personal contact and personal touch with these students is very important, and they will not be able to get it via online meetings, via online classrooms. So these are also one next group of students we have to take care of. Then we also have to take into consideration that not all students have the same family backgrounds. Not all students are families that are able to help them during this time. We can hear really scary and heartbreaking stories about abusive families, and these are also the students that should be able to seek help but are unable to during this time. And after all, maybe the most privileged, disadvantaged student in this story were the students, of course, that decided to study abroad, or actually all the students, because actually not only that these inequalities were showing during the crisis, but also shown now because each of the European countries decided to take different measures during this educational crisis time, and also decide to take different measures as to how the final exams will take place. So, of course, some countries decide to cancel final exams, and these students do not have the equivalent diploma as to the students that did have final exams. So, of course, the inequalities at the moment are really big, and I feel like maybe we needed the crisis to see these inequalities and to finally start tackling them holistically, because they're super important. And in the world that is going in this way of digitalization and everything being not so face-to-face and person-in-person, I feel like these are the problems that we'll have to tackle first before, of course, we continue on to the next things. So as I said before, OBESSU and, of course, the student union did tackle or did advocate and address these measures through their work. We also, at OBESSU, we also had a problem of course, the DET students, how will the apprenticeship work, because of course, and also the students, how will they have the access to labs and to actually do their physical work they have to do. So I feel like we addressed through different open letters, through different statements, and also our student unions were really active when it came to final examination, because they were, of course, we are left in this uncertainty where literally 3 weeks until the final exam, students did not know whether the final exams will take place or won't. And of course, being a student and final exam presenting you in the majority of cases, kind of also dictating your future, it is really uncertain time, but of course also impacted mental health. So yeah, it's been a really educational crisis, and I really hope that it will be a really good lesson for us, and also primarily for stakeholders, because I feel like as students and school students do realize this problem exists, but I feel like stakeholders and governments usually kind of cover their eyes before these problems, and do not tackle them as they should.
Thank you very much. And yeah, well, as a person from Wales who's been stuck in Brussels, in Belgium for the lockdown, I appreciate how the differences in different countries' approaches and rules and so on can be pretty tough. No, I particularly found interesting in your answer about the access to mental health services as well, and the limitations as well. We can't always replicate everything over Zoom calls, for example, and what's also really interesting in terms of education, but in other areas of society as well, is how, even though this crisis is totally unprecedented, what it's done is highlighted the inequalities that were actually already there. So thanks again for your answer. And with that, I hand over to Adrian of IFA Youth.
So, well, I also had a question, obviously. So we have seen in the past months that most European countries' response to the pandemic was to just basically send students home, while at the same time heavily relying on teachers and their own creativity and resources from the teachers, including material resources, to make distance learning work. There was also no European plan to respond to the crisis and its consequences on education. Do you believe things could have done differently? Looking towards the future, how do you think education systems in Europe could be made more resilient to a similar crisis? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I feel like this one is, it's a very important one, because also the things that I mentioned before are leading kind of to this future education question, which now should be also a priority of talking, like what will the learning after this crisis look like? Because not only that the crisis changed the way we're learning during these 4 months, but it will definitely change the way we learn after the crisis is over. So in the majority of countries, as you mentioned in your question, the initial response, of course, was to close schools, while the guidelines for schools as to how to act and which measures to take in the time came way too late. So we think that ministries of education should give schools clear guidelines on the content that needs to be taught online, how to conduct also assessments in order to attain this certain level of standardization, at least within the countries, and also to reduce current inequalities. During this time, we also carried out a research in which we were noticing that school students were under a lot of pressure and were overwhelmed. And also the majority of these things came because we didn't know what's ahead of us a week ahead. We didn't know what a week will bring, whether the situation will be worse, will be better. So everything was really a big uncertainty. And also teachers did not know how to respond. They assigned a lot of homework that students more often had to do alone, not of course with the help of students or with the help of teachers. And also the students and of course teachers as well didn't have the necessary equipment to handle this homework. And also we are observing a lot of incoherence in curricula. For example, schools were not either, some of them were focusing on the on content that they already received, while some were getting a new content. And we feel like this is a lot of what has to do is also the lack of, for example, lack of training for teachers, and also, of course, the lack of cooperating between the countries. We have to realize that we are living in the 21st century, that the student mobility will be is the reality, and that Europe is becoming quite borderless, and that means also that we have to cooperate between the countries. We do realize that, of course, every country has its own educational system, but of course, some of the guidelines should be also taken in this European level. So now that we are kind of done with this first, we're not quite out of the first wave of coronavirus, but at least we are done with this first part of learning during the crisis. I think the thing that is most important one is that we need assessment. So we need to look back onto these 4 months, how educational system looked like, what were some of the benefits, the negative sides of it, what worked, what did not, what we have to change differently, because this is actually the only way that that we can learn from it. I think the current crisis actually shows us that educational institutions, education, and also teachers and school students at the end of the day, that we are really not ready for distance learning. I think the crisis also gives us this really great opportunity to rethink our school models and to find new innovative methods of teaching. And also we can say this time that we're learning online to be this experimenting period where we could test, of course, what learning outcomes were, what we actually gave into the educational system, because also a lot of countries, maybe here not only European, I know China, for example, invested a lot of money and literally overnight built an online educational system that worked really great. So also a lot of different countries also start investing into digitalization, of course, and I'm going to tackle this later on as well, into digitalization, which I think is really important. However, we also have to remind, and also I think this period was quite a clear reminder that even though the future is digital, probably in a way, that this face-to-face interactions between students and teachers are really, really important and are such a big social aspect, and are actually fundamental. So in the future, we also have to look at this combined way of working and of learning. So I already mentioned, of course, in the beginning, this lack of training for teachers, which I think is one of the things that Europe, but also member countries have to work on. So of course, education authorities should invest more in developing the capacity of teachers by providing them training to help them to adapt to new teaching environment, and of course develop their online teaching skills, because this was of course one of the main issues. Why also at the beginning the classes couldn't go directly from physical to online, because of course the teachers all weren't ready for it, and also that investment in digitalization is important. So some countries, I think now during this crisis, were quite clear which countries lack past investment into digitalization, which makes it even more complicated to effectively change these methods and tools. And I think it is something that is coming to us inevitably. So it is definitely important we start working on creating this effective and inclusive digital tools now, so then we are ready either for the fall semester or even the years ahead. So I think this is kind of what it is for now. So I think now just a quick bottom line. I think now looking toward the future, the most important part is, at least for the next few months, to actually analyze, to assess the current, how the current educational system look like, and which were also taking consideration here the inequalities, and how the governments will want to tackle this in the future.
Yeah, I would say that thanks for your intervention, Lucia. It was very interesting. I would say that a bit with the general tone of the whole conversation, that at the end this has been an unprecedented crisis for many aspects of life, but certainly for education, which is something that we take for granted in a way. And this has shown the limitation that it has, the educational systems, of course, in different ways, but certainly the limitation that it can have, especially since for many people, unfortunately, education is sometimes morely seen as a babysitter in a way, and there is much more pedagogical content into it. And this crisis shows how, teaching is much more than simply assigning homework, and that's it. And I think that in a way, as you mentioned, it may be an opportunity to act, and hopefully it should be considered that for our governments. Well, thank you very much, Lucia.
Maybe just a quick refresher from my side. That's it. When you said also the opportunity to act, I really truly hope that the stakeholders that they will actually see this as an opportunity to act, because I feel like we were never never pretty much in the history of the humankind, we were never faced with a problem as this one, especially now, because it will be, of course, different if this were to happen 15 years ago, when, of course, we wouldn't have any other choice than to stay at home and learn from our notebooks. But now that we have these online tools that are so beneficial and can actually enrich our student experience so much and enrich an educational system, I feel like it will really be an amazing opportunity to see how to act, and also how to find this symphony between the face-to-face life and also these digital tools, because together we have two really powerful tools that can create an amazing educational system. We just now have to know how to approach it, and and of course how to use it.
Thank you very much. This concludes our conversation for today. Thank you all for your participation, and most importantly, thank you, Lucia, for your insights on this important question.
Thank you very much for having me. I really hope that together also all the organizations that work with youth will be able to fight for school students, for youth rights, even more, on. And I really hope that this crisis doesn't weaken us, but actually does make us stronger, and does stand us for new problems, new challenges, which I really think that together we can. Together, as the motto of OBESSU goes, it's together we are stronger.
Thank you. And thank you all for watching. We hope that you have found this conversation inspiring and interesting. And if you have not yet watched the first and second episodes of this series, they are available on the Coppieters Foundation website and social media channels. Take care and goodbye.